You were driving. Those 3 words. Not shouted, not screamed, just dropped into the silence between them like a stone into still water. And the ripple of it spread through young Cole's entire body before he could stop it. He stared at the man across the table, Victor Rail, 50-something, silk shirt, a glass of water he hadn't touched, eyes that didn't blink enough. I said, "You were driving," Victor repeated. Calm, almost gentle. The night your brother died. You were behind the wheel." Young's jaw tightened. His hands, both flat on the table, pressed down until his knuckles whitened. And now, Victor slid a single folded paper across the polished surface. "You will do what I'm asking, or everyone will know exactly what kind of man sits behind that wheel." Young didn't open the paper. He already knew what was inside it, and somewhere in the room behind him, he felt, rather than heard. At the shift of weight, 2 men, standing by the door. He hadn't seen them enter, that was the point. He was already surrounded. He had been for 2 years. Welcome to Afro-Korean Stories TV. If this is your first time here, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. We tell stories that live in the space between cultures, between silences, between people who were never supposed to find each other. If this story already has your heart, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that like button. Now drop a comment and tell us you're here. And then, let's go back in. 48 hours earlier, young Cole did not exist. That was the only way to describe it. The way he moved through the world, like a man who had decided, quietly and completely, to stop taking up space. He woke at 5, made coffee, drank it standing over the sink of his apartment above the garage, watching the street below come alive without him. Itaewon at dawn, the Nigerian restaurant owner rolling up his shutters, and the old Korean woman dragging her vegetable cart, the sound of a city that had no idea one of its residents had erased himself from it entirely. He couldn't hear any of it, not the cart, not the shutters, not the woman singing something low and private under her breath as she worked. 2 years ago, a crash on the Busan coastal road took his hearing, and took something else that no doctor could name and no surgery could return. His brother Devonte had been in the passenger seat. I'm 23 years old, laughing at something on his phone when the other car came through the red light. Young had been driving. He was always driving. He set down the coffee cup, picked up a wrench, went downstairs to the garage, and lay underneath a '98 Hyundai that didn't need fixing, and fixed it anyway. Because the work kept his hands busy, and his hands, when they had nothing to do, had a habit of forming shapes he wasn't ready for. The shape of a steering wheel. He gripped too tight. The shape of reaching across a seat and finding nothing there. By 7 a.m., Des arrived. Jang Dai-soo. Des to everyone who knew him, which was not many people, because Des had the social footprint of a man who preferred engines to conversations. He was Young's age, broader, with permanently grease-darkened hands, and a face that had been rearranged once or twice by life's less gentle moments. He dropped a paper bag of kimbap on the hood of the Hyundai and crouched down. You sleep?" he asked, then remembered, and pulled out his phone. Typed it instead. Young rolled out from under the car, read the screen, shook his head. Des typed again. "Victor's people called. He wants you at the Gangnam building tonight, 8 o'clock. Young stared at the words. Something moved across his face. Not fear, exactly. The thing that lives just behind fear, where you already know what's coming but you haven't let yourself name it yet. He took the phone. R typed, "Tell him I'll be there." Handed it back. Rolled back under the car. Des stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he picked up a wrench himself and got to work. That was how they communicated best. Side by side in the language of things that needed fixing. Across the street, Precious James was already arguing with a 17-year-old boy who had no interest in being argued with. "You told your mother," she signed, fast and precise. her hands cutting the air between them with the kind of authority that came from growing up in a household where silence was never emptiness. It was always full of something. That you didn't care about university. You told her that in front of your entire family. The boy, Kim Soo-hyun, deaf since birth, furious since approximately age 14, signed back, "She doesn't listen. She never listens. What's the point of saying anything?" Asterisk. The point. Precious paused. They dropped her hands for a moment. Looked at him with the particular expression she had, the one that wasn't sympathy exactly, but was the next thing over from it, the thing that said, "I see you and I am not going anywhere." Is that saying it is how you find out who's actually paying attention? Soo-hyun's hands stilled. She let the silence sit. Then he signed, smaller now. "Did it work for you?" Precious James had come to Seoul 7 years ago from Lagos, Nigeria. With a linguistics degree, an ASL qualification, and 30,000 won she had borrowed from her aunt. She had a deaf mother, had grown up with signing hands the way other children grew up with lullabies, and she had learned, very young, that the world was divided into two kinds of people, those who made themselves understood and those who waited to be found. She had always been the first kind. But Soo-hyun's question landed somewhere under her ribs and stayed there. Did it work for you?" "Still working on it," she signed back, and smiled, and meant it. After the session, she sat on the front steps of the East Side Community Center with a container of jollof rice she'd brought from home, because she had never trusted Korean convenience store food with her lunch hour, and watched the street. Itaewon moved around her, tourists, expats, the particular beautiful chaos of a neighborhood that had never agreed on one identity and had decided, wisely, to simply contain all of them. And across the street, the garage. She had noticed the man before, not in the way that demands attention, but in the way that earns it, quietly over time. He came and went without announcement. He had no visible friends except the broad one who arrived every morning with food. He never looked at his phone. He never looked at anyone. But today, as a city bus groaned past on the road between them, she saw something. And he had both palms flat on the hood of the car he was working on, not checking anything, not listening for a knock in the engine, just receiving. The vibration of the passing bus traveling through the asphalt, into the car's frame, into his hands. His eyes were closed. His face, which was usually locked down to something unreadable, that face, just for a moment, loosened, like a man who had found something he was looking for and didn't want to name it in case it disappeared. The Precious ate her rice and watched and said nothing, but she thought, "This man knows exactly how to listen. He's just forgotten the part where you let someone listen back." That evening, Young dressed without looking in the mirror. Dark jacket, keys. The drive to Gangnam took 22 minutes on roads still damp from the afternoon rain. Victor Rail's building was a 40-story tower of glass that reflected the city back at itself, all clean lines and quiet menace. But the kind of architecture that said, "The person inside this building has already won." Young took the elevator to the 38th floor. Victor was standing at the window when Young entered, looking out at Seoul the way a man looks at something he owns. He turned when he saw Young's reflection in the glass, smiled. The smile of someone who had rehearsed warmth until it became indistinguishable from the real thing. He gestured at the chair across the table. Young sat. Victor sat across from him. His mouth began moving, and Young caught fragments, shapes of words, because he had spent 2 years learning to read the rooms people built with their bodies when they thought no one was paying attention. Victor's hands were relaxed on the table. His shoulders were back. This was not a man who was nervous. That was the most dangerous thing in the room. Victor slid a notepad and pen across the table with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. who had perhaps been dealing with Young long enough to know the rules of this particular silence. He wrote, "The Bukhansan Circuit. 3 weeks. The most important race of the season. You've been requested specifically. Young read it, picked up the pen, wrote, by who? Victor wrote, the people who matter. Vargas is entering. The investors want a real race, not a walkover. And they want you and Vargas on that mountain at the same time." Young stared at the name. Vargas. Miguel Vargas. Brazilian, 30 years old. The kind of driver who confused recklessness with talent and had so far been lucky enough that no one had made him understand the difference. Young had seen him race twice. Both times he had felt, through the soles of his feet, the vibration of a near miss that Vargas hadn't even registered. What he wrote, "And after?" Victor's pen. "After? The debt is cleared. You're done. Free." Young looked at the word free for a long time. Then he wrote, "Okay." He stood. Victor stood. And then, just as Young turned to leave, Victor put a hand on his shoulder, turned him back, and spoke directly, slowly, his lips shaping every word with deliberate clarity. "Don't disappoint me, Young." It wasn't a request. Young drove home in the dark. He didn't turn on the radio. Hadn't. In 2 years, because silence in a car used to mean something different. It used to mean Devante had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, head against the window, and Young would drive the rest of the way without music because he didn't want to wake him. Now, it just meant he was alone. He parked outside the garage, sat in the car for a moment. His hands rested on the wheel, not gripping, just resting, feeling the engine tick as it cooled. Through the garage window, and the light was still on, Dez, finishing up a job. Young sat there until the light went off. Then he went upstairs. The apartment was dark. The photograph of Devante was face down on the shelf where it had been for 2 years. He walked past it without slowing, lay down on his bed without undressing. He did not sleep. The next morning, she was on the steps again. Not with food this time. She had a thermos of tea and a stack of papers she was marking. The student assessment forms for the center's sign language intake program. She worked with her pen moving fast, pausing sometimes to stare at the middle distance with the look of someone sorting something out in their head. Young was at the car again. Different car today. A low black thing, older, that he was clearly preparing rather than repairing. He moved around it with a kind of focused economy. Nothing wasted, nothing repeated. Like a man who had learned to eliminate everything unnecessary from the way he occupied the world. Precious watched him for a moment, then went back to her forms. 10 minutes later, she dropped her pen. It rolled off the step and into the street. She pushed up from the step to retrieve it. And when she straightened, he was there. He'd crossed the street at some point while her head was down. He held the pen out. She looked at him. He looked at her. She took the pen. And then, because it was simply what her hands did before her brain could stop them, she signed "thank you." Both hands. The automatic, sincere, unhesitating sign of someone for whom this was not a language, but a reflex. He didn't move, didn't nod, didn't turn away. He looked at her hands. It lasted maybe 4 seconds, that look. But there was something in it that Precious, who had spent her entire adult life reading what people couldn't say out loud, as felt in the base of her throat. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of the language. Like a man who had heard a song playing faintly somewhere and stopped walking because the melody was almost a word he knew. Then he handed her the pen. She still had it, she realized. She'd signed "thank you" with both hands, which meant she'd opened her fingers and the pen had still been in her palm. And he walked back across the street. She watched him go. He knows that language. She thought. He just doesn't know that he knows it. That evening, she knocked on his car window. She had told herself she wasn't going to. She had, in fact, actively decided against it. She had a rule, a careful, considered rule built over years of working with people in their most fragile states. That said, let people come to you. Don't cross the street you haven't been invited to cross. Asterisk. But she had watched him for 2 weeks. She had seen him press his palms to engine hoods and concrete walls and the bonnet of the car when rain started, receiving the world through vibration because the world would not give itself to him through sound. And something about that, the particular loneliness of a man who had found a way to keep listening even when the sound was gone, would not leave her alone. So she knocked. He opened his eyes. They were dark and still. The expression in them was the same as it always was. But there was something behind it now. A new layer. Something that had been disturbed. She held up her phone. She'd typed it before she knocked. You feel the engine instead of hearing it, don't you? You read the road through your hands. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. A small, precise movement, the kind that meant something was being held back with deliberate effort. He took her phone. I typed, "What do you want?" She read it, looked at him, typed back, "Nothing. I just think that's remarkable." He read the word remarkable, and something happened in his face that he couldn't control fast enough to hide it. Something that looked, just for a second, like a man who had been in darkness for so long that someone switching on a light had physically hurt him. He gave back her phone, started the engine, drove away. Precious stood in the street. She wasn't surprised, and she had expected him to drive away. But she had also noticed, and she noted this the way she noted everything quietly, without attaching too much to it, that he had not gone far. His tail lights were visible at the end of the street, parked in the dark, unmoving. She went inside. He sat in that car for over an hour. He came to her 2 days later. She was in the community center, door open as it always was in the afternoons, because she believed in the policy of the open door. The one that said, if you need something, the way in is visible and the lights are on. She was practicing a sign sequence for a new student's intake, working through an extended passage from memory, her hands moving through it with the fluency of someone reciting something beloved. She felt rather than heard the change in the room's light. She looked up. He was in the doorway, jacket on despite the warmth, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly forward, the posture of someone who has committed to a decision and is already regretting it but is too proud to reverse it. They looked at each other. Then he took his right hand out of his pocket and pointed, once direct, unmistakable, at her hands. Precious set down her papers. She showed him 3 signs. Hello, both hands, fluid, a greeting that opened outward like a door. Oh, thank you. The fingers of her right hand touching her chin and moving forward. A gesture that came from the same place as a bow, she always thought. Gratitude that bent toward the other person. Sorry. A closed fist rotating gently over the heart. He watched each one. Then he tried them. Hello? Stiff, mechanical, but accurate. Thank you. A little quick, but there. Sorry. He stopped. Started again, his fist against his chest, the slow rotation of it. Was something in the motion, the gesture of apology pressed against the place where the heart was, made his eyes change. She didn't look away. She corrected the angle of his wrist gently, not touching him, just demonstrating beside him, and said nothing. He got it right. He left without signing goodbye. She watched him cross the street. She noticed that he walked more slowly than usual, like a man carrying something he hadn't been carrying before. Good, she thought. Heavy things are better carried than buried. Over the following days, it became a thing that had no name and needed none. He would appear in the doorway in the afternoons. She would be there. They would work, slowly in fragments, through the vocabulary of a language that had no room for everything that wasn't essential. ASL had taught Precious a long time ago that most human communication was decoration. Unstrip it back to hands and face and breath, and what remained was always the true thing. She taught him. I, you. See? Don't understand. Say that again. Beautiful. Broken. Stay. He learned stay on the fourth day and did not use it, but he looked at it for a long time before they moved on. Like a man who had found an object in a drawer he didn't know was still there. She taught him. Afraid, angry, alone, together. He learned alone with no trouble at all, and it was together that took him 3 attempts. She didn't comment. She never commented. This was the thing he seemed to need most, to be seen without commentary, to be allowed to work through something without someone explaining it back to him. She understood this because she had spent her whole adult life being the person who explained things back to people. She was very good at it, and she had learned in the private hours, and that being very good at explaining other people's experiences did not mean she had dealt with any of her own. On the 7th day, she asked him to tell her something about himself, hands only. He shook his head. She waited. He shook his head again. She waited some more. Then slowly, with the concentrated effort of someone disarming something, he raised his hands. He signed the shape of a car, curved, low to the ground. Then 2 figures, one on each side, driving, speed, and the lean of a road. Then, he stopped. His hands hung in the air for a moment. Then they finished the sentence in a single motion, a collision, an impact made visible. One figure, still standing, the other, not. Gone. The space where it had been more terrible than any word for it. His hands dropped to his sides. The room was completely still. Precious looked at him, not at his hands now, but at his face. On the face of a man who had just said the thing he had been swallowing for 2 years and was waiting for the shape of himself to change now that it was out. She raised her hands slowly. She signed, making sure he could follow every movement, slow and deliberate and absolutely clear. You are still here. That is not a crime. He stood up. He walked out. She heard, distantly, a minute later, the sound of a car engine starting, not racing, just idling. Sitting in a place with the engine running, the way a man might sit in the one room of his house where the walls don't close in. She gathered her papers, turned off the center lights. She thought about what it must cost to carry a word like guilty in the body for long enough that it stopped being a thought and became a posture, a way of standing, a reason to make yourself smaller and smaller until you almost disappeared. She thought about her own smallness. Oh, the way she had crossed an ocean and built a life, and still, in the private moments, asked herself whether she had the right to need things. Whether a woman who had always been the bridge was allowed to sometimes be the destination. She locked the door. Across the street, his car was still idling. 10 days before the race, Des came to Young with a look on his face that had never appeared there before. Young was under the black car, the race car, fully stripped now, rebuilt in the way only Young rebuilt things. From the bones outward, nothing assumed. Every component tested against his hands before it went back in. He felt the shadow before he registered it. Rolled out. Des crouched down. His face was doing something complicated. He typed, "The race has changed. I just got the full brief from Victor's coordinator. Young Reed." Typed, "Changed how?" Des typed slowly, like a man choosing words with unusual care. "You're not winning this race. The Victor needs Vargas to win. There's a specific point, lap 4 after the second descent, where you're supposed to fall back. Let him through. Make it look like an engine issue." Young stared at the screen. He typed, "What happens if I don't?" Des looked at him for a long moment, then typed, "Victor's words, not mine." He said, Cole knows what he has to lose. The garage was very quiet. Young put the phone down on the concrete floor. Mid lay back and stared at the underside of the car above him. The clean geometry of it, the exhaust routing, the chassis bracing, things he had put there himself because he trusted nothing he hadn't touched. Lap 4, Bukhansan Mountain, Vargas taking the lead at 140 kilometers per hour on a road that had 12 meters of visibility after the second descent. Vargas, who drove like every race was his last because he had never properly understood that one day it would be. Young did not think about himself. He thought about the barriers on the Bukhansan circuit, the spectators who would be pressed up against them, close enough to feel the air move as the cars went past. He thought about the volunteers in their yellow vests who had no idea, when they signed up, that the race result had already been decided in a glass tower in Gangnam. He thought about Devante. He rolled back out from under the car, stood up, picked up his keys. Dez caught his arm, typed, fast. "Where are you going?" Young typed back. "Across the street." He put his phone in her hands without preamble. She was closing up for the evening, keys in one hand, bag over her shoulder, already halfway through the mental transition from work to home. She looked at the phone. She read everything on it. He watched her read, watched her face move through the information the way his hands moved through a rebuilt engine, carefully, not skipping anything, finding the weight of each component. She looked up. Her eyes were steady. She was not afraid, or she was afraid, and had made a decision about what to do with it, which Precious James, he was learning, was the same thing. She typed, gave him back his own phone. "What do you need from me? Not, what are you going to do? Not, this is dangerous, you should go to the police. Not the dozen things he would have expected from anyone who had just been handed a problem of this size. What do you need from me?" Young held the phone for a long time. He thought about the word need. He thought about how long it had been since he'd let himself form a sentence around it. He thought about Devante, who used to say, "Young, you act like needing things is a character flaw. It's not. It just means you're a person." He raised his hands. He signed, slowly, imperfectly, with the vocabulary of a man who had been learning for less than 2 weeks. The word she had taught him on the first day. "Sorry." She shook her head, signed back with absolute clarity, holding his gaze the entire time. "Not to me. Never to me. If you've made it this far into the story, and we know you have, this is your moment. We see you. We feel you breathing through this with us. If you haven't subscribed to Afro-Korean Stories TV yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs a story that actually means something. Drop a comment. Tell us what you're feeling right now, because this story has a long way still to go, and we want you in it with us until the very last word. They planned in silence. Not the silence of people who had run out of things to say. The silence of two people who had found a language that worked better than the one the world expected them to use. ASL, diagrams on paper, her phone, his phone. May passed back and forth between them across the table in the community center until the plan existed in full. Young would not throw the race. He would win, but carefully, on terms that removed Victor's ability to respond. The key was Dez. If Dez leaked the details of Victor's illegal betting syndicate to an anonymous tip line before race day, Victor would be too busy managing the fallout to position his men effectively on the mountain. The leak had to be precise, enough to move, and not enough to trace back. Precious would go to the mountain. Young shook his head immediately when she wrote it down. Typed, "Absolutely not." She typed back, "The Bukhansan chicane. Lap 3 when cars slow through the hairpin. I can be at the barrier. I can sign to you through the window. Tell you where Victor's men are positioned, what's ahead. You can't hear radio communication. I'm the only real-time information you'll have." He typed, "It's dangerous. She typed, yes. He typed, you could get hurt. She typed, young. He looked up. She signed, slow and deliberate, the sign she had taught him just 4 days ago. Together. He looked at the sign. He looked at her hands, still holding the shape of it. He nodded once. Des, when they told him, leaned back against the workbench and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. And then he typed, you both understand that this is completely insane? Young typed, yes. Des looked at Precious. She nodded calmly in the manner of someone confirming a reasonable and considered decision. Des shook his head. Typed, fine, I'll make the call. But if this goes wrong, he deleted that sentence. Started again. It won't go wrong, he deleted that too. Finally settled on, I'll make the call. Young typed, thank you. Des looked at him. See, something happened in his face. Something that had been waiting a long time to surface. He typed quickly like he was getting it out before he could think better of it. Devante would have liked her. Young read it. He held very still for a moment. Then he typed, I know. 3 days before the race, Precious made a mistake. She didn't call it that at the time. At the time, she told herself she was being thorough, that understanding the full picture of what they were walking into required her to see Victor Rael's building for herself, to know the exits, to understand the geography of the thing. She took the subway to Gangnam and walked once around the block, looked at the building from across the street, noted the entry points, the camera positions, the patrol pattern of the security guard visible through the lobby glass. She was thorough. She was careful. She did not go inside. She did not notice the man in the gray jacket who had been sitting in the coffee shop on the corner for 40 minutes and who stood up unhurriedly when she turned to leave. Des told Young that evening. He didn't build up to it. He just typed the words and put the phone in front of Young and waited. Young read them again. The garage was very quiet in the way that garages get quiet when something important is about to be said and everyone in the room knows it. Young set the phone down on the workbench very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid of breaking if you move too fast. He looked at the wall in front of him for a moment. Just the wall. The old calendar that still said March from a year he hadn't bothered to replace. But the hook where Devante used to hang his jacket when he came by on Saturday mornings to watch Young work, he had never taken that hook down. Des watched him. Typed, you okay? Young didn't look at the phone. He typed without picking it up. No. Des nodded slowly. He had known this man for 11 years. He had watched him rebuild cars and refuse help and sleep in the garage during the weeks after Busan when going upstairs meant going to the apartment alone. And he had known for 11 years, that young Cole expressed care through proximity and distress through motion. When something was wrong, Young fixed things. He fixed things that didn't need fixing. He fixed things that had been fixed already. He fixed things as a way of telling the world, I still have hands, I still have use. I am still here. The black race car sat in the middle of the garage, rebuilt and ready, every component tested, every tolerance checked. And Des picked up his phone, typed, whatever you're thinking, I'll help, whatever it is. You know that. Young looked at those words for a long moment. He had spent 2 years making sure Des never had to say that, making sure no one did. He had built his life around the principle that needing things was a debt you eventually had to repay, and he had no capacity for more debt. But something had shifted. In the doorway of a community center, and in the slow vocabulary of a language he was still learning, something had shifted. He typed, cross the street with me. Des raised an eyebrow, typed, now? Young was already picking up his keys. He crossed the street and went into the community center. She was still there, late, finishing up paperwork she'd been behind on. She looked up when he came in. His face was different, not cold. It was past cold. It was the face of someone who had let something in that was now fighting to stay contained. His eyes were burning in the specific way of a person who is furious because they are frightened, and the frightened part is the part they cannot show. He grabbed her notepad from the table, wrote, "Victor's men saw you near the building. They know you've been with me." She read it, looked up, and her expression was steady, but there was something underneath it, the expression of someone absorbing the consequences of a decision they made freely and will not apologize for. Young wrote again, faster now, the pen pressing harder. "Why did you go there? We had a plan. The plan didn't include you anywhere near that building." She took the pen, wrote, "I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know what we were actually dealing with." He took the pen. "What you were dealing with? You aren't dealing with anything. I am. This is my problem, my race, my debt." She wrote, "Not anymore." He stared at those two words. He wrote, "You don't understand what these people are capable of." She wrote, "Young." Then beneath it, "Don't do that." He looked up. She signed, hands sharp, precise, controlled, one sign at a time, "I am not fragile." He held her gaze. She held it back. She was not backing down, not flinching, not softening the message. This was not someone asking for his permission. This was someone who had already decided and had the particular stillness of a person who has made peace with a difficult choice. He signed back, and it cost him something visible, the way it always cost him to let anything out through his hands. "I know." Then he signed, "I know you're not fragile." He dropped his hands, sat down heavily in the chair across from her. He put his face in his hands for a long moment, and then he straightened, pulled the notepad back, wrote more slowly this time, "If anything happens to you on that mountain, I won't survive it. That's not a figure of speech. I need you to understand that before you decide you're coming." Precious read the words. She read them again. She had been translated for. She had been thanked, professionally and warmly, and sometimes profoundly, for the service she provided. She had been told more times than she could count, meant that she was wonderful, gifted, irreplaceable, as a bridge, as a function, as the mechanism by which other people's most important communications became possible. She had never, in the 7 years since she'd come to this country alone with a borrowed sum and 2 languages and a stubborn conviction that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, she had never had someone write those words about her. Not about what she could do, about her. She picked up the pen, and her hand was not entirely steady. She wrote, "Then make sure nothing happens to me." He looked at what she'd written. Then, for the first time in this room, in all their weeks of careful proximity, he almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the shape of one, briefly, before he put it away. He nodded. He stood. He signed goodbye. Correctly, easily. The way someone signs a word they've said so many times, it has stopped being a performance and started being a reflex. She signed it back. He left. She sat in the empty community center for a long time. Make sure nothing happens to me. She had said it lightly. She had written it as reassurance. But the truth of it, the weight of asking someone to be the thing that kept her safe, settled over her now like weather she hadn't dressed for. She had spent so long being nobody's to worry about. She wasn't sure she knew how to be that for someone. She picked up her bag, locked the door, walked home through Itaewon in the dark, past the Nigerian restaurant, past the old Korean woman's now-closed cart, past the particular complicated beauty of a neighborhood that had no clean story about itself and had never pretended otherwise. She thought, 2 more days. Victor Rail's message arrived the following morning. Not to Young. Precious found it under the door of the community center, a single card, no envelope, no signature, 1 line in neat printed Korean characters. She photographed it and sent it through a translation app. Stay home the night of the race. This is not a warning. This is a kindness. She read it 3 times. She stood in the center hallway holding the card for a long moment, the way you hold something that has weight you weren't expecting. Then she put on her jacket. She typed one message to Young. "I'll be at the mountain. Don't argue with someone who isn't there." She left her phone in the community center. Jed Young found the note on his garage door at midnight. He read it standing in the cold, read it again. Then he went upstairs and stood in the middle of the apartment. He didn't sit down. Standing in that apartment in the dark at midnight, one day before the race that was supposed to end everything, he felt the specific quality of this particular silence. Not empty, not peaceful. The silence of the moment before something that cannot be undone. He walked to the shelf. Now, the photograph of Devontae had been face down for 719 days. He picked it up. Devontae Cole, 23 years old. The photo was from a birthday dinner. His birthday, the last one. He was laughing at something off camera, head thrown back, completely uncalculated in the way that only people who don't know they're being photographed can be. He had been like that, completely present, completely without armor. Young had thought sometimes that his brother's inability to protect himself from the world was a weakness. He understood now, holding this photograph at midnight in Seoul, that it had been the bravest thing about him. He had walked into every room without a wall. Young set the photograph down, face up. He put on his jacket, picked up his keys, touched the photograph once, one hand, flat, brief, the way you touch something before you're ready to say goodbye to the weight of it. He went downstairs. They got in the car. He drove toward the mountain. Bukhansan at night was not the Bukhansan that tourists photographed. The ancient granite peaks in morning light, the temple bells at dusk, the particular Korean beauty of rock and pine and cloud that had been painted and written about for 1,000 years. Bukhansan at night was something older than that. The dark between the trees was absolute. The road was narrow in ways that daylight concealed. And in the city below, when you came around the right bend at the right moment, was so far below that it looked like something you might not be able to return to. Young knew the road. He had driven it 12 times in preparation, always alone, always at speed, learning it the way he learned everything. Not with memory, but with body. The road was in his hands now. The gradient of each descent, the bite of each bend, the places where the surface changed and the traction shifted, all of it was in him, had become part of the vocabulary of his hands. He parked at the staging area. The other cars were already there, engines ticking, crews moving around them with the focused silence of people who understood what was about to happen. Vargas was leaning against his car on the far side of the area, talking loudly, laughing at something one of his crew had said. He looked across at Young. Something flickered in his face, respect adjacent to resentment, the expression of a man who wanted to beat someone he knew was better than him. Young ignored him. He sat in his car, hands on the wheel, eyes closed. He felt the mountain through the tires, the cold of it, the gradient, the way the air up here had a different weight. He breathed slowly, felt his heart beat through the seat. He thought about Precious at the chicane barrier. He thought about Dez, and in an apartment across the city, making a phone call that would dismantle 2 years of Victor Rael's careful architecture. He thought about Devontae in the passenger seat of a different car on a different road, and for the first time, he let himself sit with that without flinching away from it. The crash had come from the other direction. It had not been Young's fault in the way he had told himself it was. He had known this. He had been told this by investigators, and by a therapist he'd seen twice and never returned to, by Dez, who had written it on notepads more times than either of them had counted. He had not been able to receive it, because receiving it would mean he had to stop punishing himself. And stopping that punishment would mean feeling everything else. He opened his eyes. The flag marshal was moving to position. Young Cole started his engine. The race began. In his world, silence, And then the particular vocabulary of speed, of vibration changing with every input, the road speaking through the wheel. He felt Vargas immediately, not Saw felt, the reckless pressure of a car driven by someone who treated proximity as aggression. Vargas liked to make other drivers aware of him. He drafted close, cut late, pushed the edge of contact. This was the strategy of a man who believed that psychological pressure was more important than line. The young moved through the first lap with the economy of someone who had nothing to prove and several very specific things to accomplish. Lap 2. The descent was clean. Young took the outside line through the second hairpin, sacrificing position briefly to build a cleaner run at the straight that followed. Vargas moved up behind him, close enough that in the cockpit Young could see his headlights as vibration through the mirrors. He let him stay there. Lap 3. The chicane. Yet the chicane on the Bukansan circuit was the only point in the race where physics forced every car to slow, a tight technical double apex corner set into the hillside where the road narrowed to approximately 1.5 car widths. Cars entered it in single file. They exited at perhaps 60 kilometers per hour before the gradient pitched them forward into the final descent. Young came through the entry, slowed. He looked to the barrier on his left. She was there. Precious James, jacket zipped to the chin, hands already moving, positioned against the barrier with the composure of someone who had not spent the last 40 minutes terrified and had simply decided not to act like it. She signed, 2 men, black clothing, inside barrier after the final bend. They have something. Young read it in the time it took to travel 10 meters through the chicane. His hands moved on the wheel. The normal line through the chicane's exit was the inside, tight, defended, the line that every driver in the field would be taking because it was the fastest. Victor's men would be positioned to disrupt the inside line, to force a contact, to make it look like a racing incident. Young took the outside. It was the wrong line. It was slower, technically, by approximately 0.4 of a second. It was also the line that took him past the inside barrier with a clear meter between his car and anything positioned against it. And that meter, as he accelerated out of the chicane and felt the road drop beneath him into the final descent, was the difference between a race and something else. He heard nothing. He felt everything. Final descent. The city below. Vargas 2 lengths behind now. He had lost ground in the chicane, taken by surprise at Young's outside line. Hakan the loss had done something to his driving. Young knew this the way he knew everything. Through the texture of the road, the behavior of the air between the cars. Vargas was angry. He was driving angry. An angry driver makes a decision late. A late decision at 140 kilometers per hour on a mountain road. Young felt it before he saw it. The vibration changed. The specific, wrong vibration of a car that has broken traction, that has asked too much of the road and the road has declined to give it. It moved through the mountain itself, through the asphalt, through his tires, and up through his hands. He moved right. Vargas's car came past him on the left, spinning, not dramatically, not the cinematic end over end of movie crashes, just spinning, 140 kilometers of momentum suddenly without direction, and the car, rotating twice before the front end, found the barrier and stopped. Vargas was alive. Young knew it immediately. The impact was corner first, not front first, which meant the survival cell was intact. He would be concussed and shaken and furious and alive. Young crossed the finish line at the bottom of the mountain. He sat in the car. He could feel the crowd through the asphalt, the vibration of it, hundreds of people, and the weight of their reaction moving through the earth and into his seat and up through his hands. He had won races before. He had felt this before. This was different. This felt like something ending and something beginning. Both at once. The particular vertiginous feeling of a door closing behind you on a room you spent too long in, and finding that the corridor ahead has light in it. He got out of the car. Des was already there. appearing through the crowd the way Des always appeared, without announcement, with the specific expression of a man who has done something irreversible and has decided it was worth it. They stood next to each other. Young typed, "Did you make the call?" Des nodded. Typed, "An hour ago. It's done." Young looked across the staging area. Victor Rael was standing at the far edge of it, still impeccably dressed, utterly composed. The two of his men were on phones behind him, moving with a new urgency that hadn't been there an hour ago. Victor was watching Young across the distance between them. He crossed it. He stood in front of Young. They looked at each other for a moment, the specific, contained look of two people who have been in a transaction together for long enough that the transaction now has its own grammar. Victor produced a notepad, wrote one line. Was it worth it? Young took the pen, and he looked at the question. He wrote, "Ask Devante." He handed back the notepad. He walked away. Victor stood for a moment, looking at the words. Something moved across his face, something too complicated and too human to be reduced to a single word, something that might have been, underneath everything else, a kind of grief for the version of this that could have gone differently. Then his phone rang, and Victor Rael, for the first time in 20 years, and had other things to worry about. She was at the barrier, still there. She hadn't moved from the chicane position, and as Young climbed back up the mountain road toward where she was standing, he saw her before she saw him. She was looking at her phone. She had retrieved it at some point and was scrolling through something with the focused attention of a woman who uses information as a way of managing the aftermath of fear. She looked up. He was 10 meters away, then 5, and then he stopped. They looked at each other on the dark mountain road, with the city glittering absurdly far below them. Young raised his hands. He signed, taking his time with each sign, getting it right, all the imperfection of a man still learning, but all the weight of a man who has never been more certain of a sentence in his life. "I see you." Precious James, who had crossed an ocean alone, though who had built her world from language and patience and the particular courage of someone who keeps showing up, looked at him. She signed back. "I know." 3 months later. The community center on a Tuesday afternoon was full of the sound of things Precious loved, the soft percussion of chairs, the creak of the building, the particular attentive silence of people learning something new. She stood in the doorway of the main room and watched through the window in the door. Inside, Young Cole stood in front of 8 young deaf students between the ages of 12 and 17, with a disassembled engine laid out on a table in front of him. He was signing, carefully, with the hands of a man who was still learning, still making small errors, still occasionally finding the word he wanted a half-second after the moment. And the students were watching him the way people watch someone who is giving them something they didn't know they needed. He had agreed to this after 3 weeks of Precious suggesting it and him declining on increasingly unpersuasive grounds. The final ground, the last one he had offered, "I'm not a teacher." She had simply looked at him until he heard himself say it. Then she had smiled and handed him a room booking form and walked away before he could reconsider. He was not a natural teacher in the conventional sense. He didn't perform, and he didn't project enthusiasm or lean into the pedagogical warmth that some instructors' weapons. What he did was show them his hands. He showed them how an engine spoke, how the road spoke. He showed them what it meant to listen with your whole body when your body was the only instrument you had. He showed them that the absence of one thing was not the absence of everything. He looked up, saw her through the window. He signed across the room, above the students' heads. I directly to her, patient and deliberate and completely sure, "I see you." Precious put her hand against the glass. She signed back, "I know." In his apartment, 1 floor above the garage that smelled of oil and cold metal, and 2 years of a man working out his grief with his hands. The photograph of Devonte Cole sat on the shelf. Face up, a young man laughing at something off camera, completely present, completely without armor. The bravest thing. This was Rhythm of the Streets, a story about the language that lives between people. In the silence, in the hands, in the willingness to cross a street you haven't been invited to cross. If this story moved you, if it reached something in you that needed reaching, then it did exactly what it was made to do. Subscribe to Afro-Korean Stories TV and stay with us. Every story we tell lives in this space, between cultures, between silences. Why, between people who were never supposed to find each other. Share this with someone, leave us a comment, tell us which moment made you hold your breath. We will be here, and so will the next story. And it is coming for you. Rhythm of the Streets, written for Afro-Korean Stories TV.